I never imagined the day my own daughter would look me in the eye and call me a burden. I never thought the man she married would have the power to throw me out of the very home where I once rocked her to sleep. But that night, when they slammed the door on me with nothing but 2 suitcases, they had no idea. I still had one last card to play. And when I played it, their world would never be the same. I never believed my own blood could betray me. I thought family was supposed to mean unconditional love, loyalty, and protection. That's what I had built my entire life around. For years, I lived for my husband and my daughter Amanda. Every meal I cooked, every holiday I planned, every dollar I saved, it was all for them. My world wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and it was built on the foundation of love. Or at least, I thought it was. When cancer took my husband last year, my world collapsed in a way I can't fully describe. Imagine walking through your own house and hearing echoes of laughter that no longer exist. Imagine lying in bed, turning to the side, and instinctively reaching out for someone who will never be there again. The grief was unbearable. Yet, in that darkness, one thought kept me alive. I still had Amanda, my daughter, my only child. Surely she would be my anchor. At first, it seemed she would. She and her husband, Chad, invited me to stay in their apartment for a while. "Until you're back on your feet, Mom," Amanda said with a soft smile. I believed her. I thought maybe living with her would ease the ache of my husband's absence. I thought it would bring us closer, that it would remind her of all the sacrifices I made to give her a good life. But I was wrong. From the very first day, I could sense Chad's disapproval. He barely looked up from his phone as I moved my suitcases into the small room in the back. His handshake was limp, his smile forced. There was a tension in his eyes every time they met mine, like my presence was a splinter beneath his skin. I tried to ignore it. I told myself, he's stressed, he works hard, it's nothing personal. So I kept my head down. I tried to be helpful. I cooked dinners, cleaned the kitchen, folded laundry, even offered to run errands. I wanted to show gratitude, to prove I wasn't a burden. But no matter how hard I tried, Chad's irritation grew. He rolled his eyes when I asked a question, changed the TV channel in the middle of my shows, muttered under his breath as he passed me in the hallway. One evening, as I was carrying a basket of laundry, I swear I heard him whisper, "Freeloader." I froze. My chest tightened. I wanted to believe I had misheard him, but deep down, I knew I hadn't. Amanda, my daughter, noticed my discomfort. Or maybe she chose to ignore it. When I gently told her I felt unwelcome, she brushed it off. "He's just stressed, Mom. Work's been tough. Don't take it personally." Her excuses stung more than his insults. And so, I swallowed the shame. I stayed quiet. That's what mothers do, right? We endure, we sacrifice, we protect our children, even if it means protecting them from the truth. But one night, that night, everything broke. It was a simple dinner. I had cooked chicken pot pie, Chad's favorite, because I thought maybe it would soften his heart. Amanda was scrolling on her phone. Chad was sipping beer. The silence around the table was heavy, suffocating. Then, out of nowhere, Chad put down his glass and said, "You know, maybe it's time we stop pretending this is temporary. We're not a charity." I froze, fork halfway to my mouth. Amanda looked up, startled, but said nothing. "What do you mean?" I whispered, my voice trembling. He smirked, leaned back in his chair, and said, "I mean, how long is this supposed to go on? You're not working. You're not contributing. We've got bills to pay. We didn't sign up for an extra mouth to feed." My breath caught. My heart pounded. I turned to Amanda, desperate, praying she would defend me. stand by me, show me the unconditional love I believed in. But she wouldn't meet my eyes. "Maybe it's best, Mom," she mumbled, her voice barely audible. "If you find something more stable, for everyone's sake." Her words pierced me deeper than any insult Chad had ever thrown. She didn't just stay silent. She chose his side. My own daughter. I didn't scream. I didn't argue. I simply stood up, my hands trembling, and walked to my room. I packed my life into 2 suitcases. That's all I had left. 2 bags of clothing, a handful of keepsakes, and the hollow shell of a heart. They didn't help me carry the bags. Amanda didn't walk me out. Chad didn't even pretend to care. I walked down the hallway alone, tears stinging my eyes, the sound of their laughter echoing behind me like knives. When the cold night air hit my face, I realized I had nowhere to go. The streets of Austin blurred through my tears as I dragged those suitcases behind me. I checked into a cheap motel with peeling wallpaper and buzzing neon lights. Lying awake that night, I stared at the ceiling, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. I had given Amanda my life, my sacrifices, my love, my years, all poured into her. And in the moment I needed her most, she turned away. That night, I realized the truth. Family isn't always unconditional. Sometimes the people you love most are the ones who betray you the deepest. I didn't know it then, but this betrayal was only the beginning. The pain they caused me would soon awaken something in me I never knew existed. And when it did, Amanda and Chad would regret the day they underestimated me. The motel smelled of stale smoke and despair. The wallpaper peeled in curling strips, and the vending machine in the hallway hummed like a reminder that even the simplest comforts cost money I didn't have. That night, after Amanda and Chad shut their door in my face, I lay awake on the stiff mattress with my 2 suitcases stacked against the wall like silent tombstones of the life I had just lost. I tried not to cry, but the tears came anyway, slow, hot, humiliating. Every sob felt like proof that Chad was right, that I really was nothing but a burden. Days bled into each other. I woke up each morning, staring at the cracked ceiling, wondering how my daughter could scroll through her phone while I was tossed aside like garbage. I sent Amanda a message the next day. "I understand. I love you always." No reply. I tried again a week later. "I hope you're okay." Silence. Months slipped by, and her silence was louder than any words. I tried to find work, anything that would let me stand on my own feet again. Grocery stores, diners, front desks. None of them wanted a grieving widow in her late 50s with no recent job history. My hands trembled when I filled out applications. My body ached in ways I hadn't felt before. I started to wonder if maybe Amanda was right. Maybe I really was useless. Loneliness became my shadow. I would sit on the edge of the motel bed, clutching my phone, willing it to buzz. But it never did. Each night, as the neon light outside flickered through the thin curtains, I told myself, this can't be the end of my story. There has to be something more. And then, something did happen. Something that would change everything. It started with a small box. I had brought it from my old house before I sold it, the house my husband and I had built from scratch, brick by brick, memory by memory. The box was dusty, filled with old photos, letters, and keepsakes. On one particularly hopeless evening, I pulled it from under the bed, searching for comfort. That's when I found it, a small, leather-bound diary. At first, I almost put it back. It belonged to my mother, who had passed many years ago. I had never really read it, just kept it as a keepsake. But something, maybe desperation, maybe fate, pushed me to open it. Her handwriting leapt off the page. Familiar loops, and neat lines that once signed my school permission slips. The first few entries were ordinary: grocery lists, comments about church, complaints about the weather. But then the words began to shift. He came again today. He said he wished things were different, that he wished I could be his wife. But he has a family, a business, a name to protect. Margaret must never know. She must never know the truth of where she comes from. My chest tightened. I read it again and again. Page after page revealed a secret I had never imagined. My mother had an affair with a powerful man. The initials were always the same: HJS. She wrote about meetings at hotels, about envelopes of money he tried to give her. She tried to refuse, but sometimes she had no choice. She wrote about the shame, the fear, the desperate prayer that I would never discover the truth. But I had. The entries grew darker, more confessional. And then, one line nearly made me drop the diary. He promised that if anything ever happened to him, Margaret would be cared for. He spoke of a trust, a letter. He said his lawyer, Mr. Leonard Goldstein, would know what to do. I sat frozen, the diary trembling in my hands. My heart thundered in my chest. Could this be real? Could my entire identity, my entire life, have been built on a lie? For the first time in months, I felt something other than despair. I felt curiosity, hope, anger. The name Leonard Goldstein stuck in my mind like a spark in dry grass. I used the motel's ancient shared computer to search. After hours of clicking through faded directories, I found him, a retired estate lawyer still listed under a private firm in Dallas. My hands shook too much to call, so I wrote him a letter instead. A real, handwritten letter. I explained who I was, who my mother was, and begged him to tell me if he knew the truth. 2 weeks later, the phone rang. "Margaret?" The voice was old, raspy, but familiar in a way I couldn't explain. "I always wondered if you would reach out one day. Yes, I knew your mother. And yes, there's something you need to see." The next morning, I packed my suitcase and boarded a Greyhound bus to Dallas. As the city skyline came into view, I realized that the lonely, broken woman who had cried herself to sleep in a cheap motel room was gone. Something new was waking inside me, and I had no idea just how much that secret diary would change the rest of my life. The bus ride to Dallas felt like stepping out of one life and into another. The hum of the Greyhound engine was steady, almost soothing, but my thoughts were anything but calm. My mind kept circling back to the diary, to the words my mother had written in her delicate script. Margaret must never know. But now I did know, and there was no going back. When I arrived at the small, book-lined office of Leonard Goldstein, I half expected disappointment, a dead end, or worse, a scam. But the moment I saw the old man's eyes soften when I said my mother's name, I knew it was real. "I wondered when you'd come," he said, sliding a fragile, yellowed envelope across the desk. "He left this for you." The letter was signed by Harold James Sterling, a name I knew from newspaper clippings and business headlines. He was the founder of Sterling Energy, a powerful oil magnate whose face had once been everywhere in Texas society. A man with wealth, influence, and a family of his own. And according to the letter, my father. My hands shook as I read his words. He confessed to the affair with my mother, the love he could never claim publicly, the shame he carried to his grave. But more than that, he confessed something else. He had left behind a portion of his personal assets, hidden outside his official estate, to ensure that I would be cared for. "You are my blood," he wrote. "Though I could not acknowledge you in life, I claim you now in death." Tears blurred the ink as I whispered the words aloud. For the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible. I wasn't forgotten. Mr. Goldstein handed me a folder filled with documents. Bank accounts, investments, property titles. A modest fortune, though by sterling standards, barely a fraction. But to me, it was everything. When I stepped out of that office and into the bright Dallas sun, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Power. Not just financial, but personal. I wasn't the abandoned widow scraping coins for dinner anymore. I was a woman with choices. For weeks after, I stayed in Dallas. I rented a small apartment downtown, not the peeling motel walls I had grown used to, but a clean, sunlit space that smelled of fresh paint and possibility. I began to change, not just my surroundings, but myself. I bought new clothes, nothing flashy, just polished and deliberate. I walked taller. I looked people in the eye again, and at night, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, devouring YouTube tutorials and business articles on real estate, investing, contracts. I scribbled notes in the margins of a cheap notebook like a student cramming for an exam. I wasn't trying to build an empire. I wasn't trying to become someone else. I was simply learning to protect myself. I vowed that no one would ever have the power to discard me again. And then, one late evening, while scrolling through property listings, I found it. A notice buried on a real estate auction site. A distressed property in East Austin. A small apartment building, run down but structurally sound. The location? The very same complex where Amanda and Chad lived. My heart stopped. I stared at the screen, the cursor blinking beside the listing like it was daring me. The building was defaulting on property taxes. It would be up for auction in 2 weeks. I didn't hesitate. I called Mr. Goldstein the next morning. With his guidance, I formed an LLC under a discreet name, ML Holdings. Margaret Louise, my initials hidden behind a shield of paperwork. Anonymous, untraceable. The day of the auction, I sat quietly in the back of the room while men in suits whispered and scribbled numbers on notepads. My palms sweated as the auctioneer called out figures. When the gavel finally struck, my bid had won. Just like that, the building belonged to me. The very same building where my daughter and her husband had looked me in the eye and told me I was a burden. The same building where I had packed my life into 2 suitcases. The place that had broken me was now mine. I drove back to my apartment that night, deed in hand, my reflection in the rearview mirror, unrecognizable. I was no longer the woman they had humiliated. I was the landlord, the owner, the one in control. But I didn't buy it for revenge. Not exactly. I bought it because owning the place where they once erased me was the most poetic way to reclaim my dignity. A month later, official notices went out to every tenant. Lease terms would be reassessed. Rent would be adjusted to reflect current market value. And for Amanda and Chad, their new rent was not double, but triple. I didn't need to see Chad's face to know he was furious. I could feel it from miles away. And when Amanda tried calling me for the first time in months, I let it ring. This wasn't about cruelty. This was about consequence. Because the truth was simple. They had tried to erase me. And instead, they had awakened me. The day I became the legal owner of the building, something inside me shifted. It wasn't just a piece of paper or a deed. It was proof that I had risen from the ashes of their betrayal. The very place where Amanda and Chad had humiliated me, where I had walked out with nothing but 2 suitcases, now belonged to me. I whispered to myself that night as I stared at the signed documents. Let's see how he likes paying rent to a mouth he couldn't feed. At first, I kept everything quiet. My LLC ML Holdings shielded my name. To the tenants, I was just another anonymous landlord making changes from afar. But I wasn't distant. Every decision, every notice, every repair order, I oversaw them personally. Letters went out, rent reassessments, lease reviews, market adjustments. Chad and Amanda's rent didn't just go up, it tripled. Market value plus overdue fees. I didn't need to see Chad's face to know the vein in his forehead would be pulsing with rage. He was a man who thrived on control, and I had just stolen it from him without him even knowing. 2 days after the letters were delivered, my phone buzzed. Amanda. I let it go to voicemail. Her voice was small, almost broken. Mom, I don't know if you heard, but something weird's going on. Our rent just shot up. Chad's furious. Can we talk? I didn't respond. This wasn't vengeance. It was justice. They needed to feel the weight of their choices. From a distance, I watched the consequences unfold. Chad sent angry emails to the property manager, filled with threats and bluster. This is extortion. I demand to speak to the owner. We won't stand for this. I smiled, reading his words. He had no idea the owner he was demanding to face was the same woman he had once sneered at across his dinner table. Meanwhile, I started making improvements to the building. Small things at first. Fixing leaks, upgrading locks, replacing hallway lights. The other tenants were grateful. Rent increases were never popular, but at least they saw results. For them, I was a faceless benefactor. For Chad, I was the invisible enemy he couldn't name. The silence between us was my weapon. I didn't scream, I didn't argue, I didn't lower myself to his level. I simply let him choke on the reality that his life was no longer his to control. One evening, I drove past the building. Their lights were on. I could see shadows moving behind the curtains. Amanda pacing, Chad shouting. His silhouette was unmistakable. For a moment, I almost felt pity. Almost. But then I remembered the night I stood outside, abandoned, the wind cutting through my coat, with nowhere to go. That pity turned to steel. I wasn't cruel. I didn't want them homeless. I wanted them humbled. Weeks passed, and I noticed changes. Amanda looked thinner, paler. When I saw her at the grocery store one day, she didn't see me. Her cart was half empty, filled with cheap staples, rice, beans, off-brand canned goods. She paused in front of a box of macaroni and cheese, then put it back. The girl who once begged me to check under her bed for monsters was now living with one. I tightened my grip on the cart I was hiding behind. My heart ached, but I reminded myself, this wasn't punishment. This was consequence. Behind closed doors, Chad unraveled. Reports came from the building staff. He stormed into the management office, demanding to know the owner's name. He left angry notes about water pressure, trash pickup, anything he could use as ammunition. He was drowning, and the more he fought, the deeper he sank. Amanda, though, she was different. She began leaving me voicemails, soft, hesitant ones. Hi, Mom. Just wanted to see if maybe you had time to talk. I know things are complicated. I miss you. I listened, but I didn't reply. Not yet. She had chosen silence when I begged her to defend me. Now she was learning what silence felt like. At the same time, I started to change. My reflection no longer showed a broken widow. I dressed with purpose. I carried myself with confidence. I joined small business meetups, introduced myself under my LLC's name, learned the ropes of property management. People didn't ask about my past. They only saw a composed woman with sharp eyes and cash to invest. And Amanda and Chad? They saw nothing. To them, I was invisible. But the thing about invisibility is this. Sometimes it's not a weakness. Sometimes it's power. Because people can't fight what they can't see. The building was mine. Their roof was mine. Every night, when Chad locked the door, thinking he was in control, he was locking it under my authority. They didn't know it yet, but one day, they would. And when that day came, I wouldn't need to scream. I wouldn't need to remind them of the night they threw me out. My very existence, the quiet, undeniable truth, would be louder than any revenge. This was my silent justice, and it had only just begun. Chad was a man built on control. Control over his job, over his apartment, and most painfully, over my daughter. When that control slipped through his fingers, he began to unravel. The rent increase was the crack that split his pride wide open. At first, he treated it like a mistake, storming into the management office demanding answers. "Who owns this dump? I want names. I want a face." The property manager remained calm, telling him everything was handled legally. That only made Chad's fury worse. He sent emails dripping with venom. He pounded on neighbors' doors complaining about noise. He cursed at maintenance staff for imagined problems. His arrogance had nowhere to land, and it began to eat him alive. Amanda was caught in the middle. She was always the peacekeeper, the quiet shadow who smoothed over Chad's rough edges. But now, even she couldn't calm him. Reports reached me through the building staff, shouting matches behind their door, glass breaking, neighbors complaining of late-night arguments. Chad was no longer just angry. He was crumbling, and Amanda, she was paying the price. I saw her again one morning, walking down the street with dark circles under her eyes. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, the way she used to wear it as a teenager when she'd been crying. She clutched a grocery bag with only bread, milk, and cheap cereal inside. My chest tightened. She looked like a ghost of the girl I raised. That night, she left me another voicemail. Her voice trembled. "Mom, I don't know how to say this. Chad's he's not easy anymore. He's angry all the time. About the rent, about work, about everything. I know I haven't been there for you, but I miss you. I just don't know how to fix this." For the first time since that awful night, her words cracked through the wall I had built around my heart. But I didn't call back. Not yet. She needed to sit with the silence she had once handed me so easily. Meanwhile, Chad's spiral deepened. His hours at work increased, but so did his drinking. He stormed through the building like a caged animal, leaving angry notes under the office door. "The water pressure is pathetic. The trash is piling up. If this is what we're paying for, it's robbery." Every note went unanswered. Every outburst echoed back at him. For a man who thrived on dominance, the silence was worse than confrontation. He was suffocating in it, and Amanda was drowning alongside him. The reports from staff grew darker. A neighbor heard Amanda crying on the back steps one afternoon. Another heard Chad shouting about losing control and slamming a door so hard the walls shook. I should have felt pity, but pity is a luxury. What I felt was clarity. This wasn't about rent. It wasn't about money. It was about power, and Chad was losing his grip. Amanda, though, she began reaching out more often. Texts now, not just voicemails, short, desperate ones. "Hey, can we talk? I really need you. I'm sorry." I stared at those words on my phone for hours, my thumb hovering over the screen. A part of me longed to reply, to wrap my daughter in the arms that had once been her whole world. But another part remembered the night I begged for her voice at the dinner table, and she stayed silent. That silence had cost me everything. And now, she was learning what silence cost in return. One evening, My property manager sent me photos of their unit during a quarterly inspection. The bathroom tiles were cracked. The kitchen counters were stained. Unopened mail piled on the floor. They were unraveling, not just emotionally, but physically. Amanda looked thinner in those photos, her clothes hanging loose on her frame. Chad looked heavier, his face bloated with stress and alcohol. The proud couple who once looked down on me now looked like survivors in their own home. The irony wasn't lost on me. Their inflated rent was funding improvements for everyone else in the building: better lighting, repaired locks, fresh paint. Every tenant benefited, except them. The collapse of Chad was no longer quiet. It was loud, messy, public. Tenants whispered about his temper. Staff rolled their eyes at his complaints, and Amanda's once bright spirit dimmed into shadows. Yet through it all, I remained silent. Because this wasn't revenge, this was consequence. Still, some nights I sat in my apartment staring at Amanda's last message on my phone. "I really need you." The mother in me ached, but the woman I had become, the woman they created by betraying me, knew the truth. If Amanda wanted me back in her life, she would have to walk through the fire Chad had set. She would have to see with her own eyes what I had seen all along. The cracks were growing wider. Their foundation was crumbling. And soon, Amanda would have to choose: remain in the cage Chad built, or reach for the key I had quietly placed within her grasp. The collapse had begun, and it was only a matter of time before it shattered everything. The building's common room was quiet, filled with the faint hum of fluorescent lights and the rustle of papers. I arrived early, my charcoal blazer pressed, my hair softly curled. I looked nothing like the woman who once begged for a place at Amanda's table. I looked like what I had become: the owner, the authority, the power behind the walls that housed them. It was time for the tenants' annual meeting, mandatory attendance, routine updates. But for Chad and Amanda, it was going to be far from routine. One by one, the tenants filed in, some carrying notebooks, others just curious. And then they arrived. Chad stormed through the door first, Amanda trailing behind like a shadow. His jaw was tight, his eyes sharp, already searching for confrontation. "Where is she?" Chad barked at the property manager. "I want to speak to the owner, tonight." The manager remained calm, flipping through his folder. "All questions will be addressed during the presentation." Chad scoffed, slamming into a chair. Amanda's eyes stayed glued to the floor. I sat at the back, silent, invisible. For now. The meeting began. The property manager went through the slides: upgrades to the hallways, new security systems, landscaping improvements. All funded, in part, by the very rent Chad had been raging about for weeks. Then, at the end, the manager paused. "Before we conclude, I'd like to thank ML Holdings for their commitment to revitalizing the property. The owner is here tonight should anyone have questions." My heart drummed steadily in my chest. I stood up. The room turned. And there I was, Margaret, the woman Chad once called a burden. The mother Amanda had abandoned. The invisible landlord who now owned every wall surrounding them. "Good evening," I said, my voice steady. "My name is Margaret. I'm the owner of this building." The silence was suffocating. Chad's face contorted in disbelief. He shot to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the floor. "You? This is a joke. What kind of game are you playing?" I looked at him calmly. "No game. Just business." He sneered, taking a step toward me. "You manipulated this. You've been behind all of this. The rent hikes, the notices. You're trying to ruin us." I held his gaze, my voice quiet but firm. "I gave you a roof. I treated every tenant equally. What I didn't do was forget." For the first time, Chad faltered. His mouth opened, then closed. He looked at Amanda for backup, but she was frozen, her wide eyes locked on me. "Mom," she whispered, her voice cracking. You own this place?" I nodded. "I do." Her lips parted, trembling. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you had to see it," I said softly. "Not just hear it. See it." The room was still, the other tenants watching as though the air itself might shatter. Chad's anger boiled over. "This doesn't change anything. You think you've won? You're nothing but a bitter old woman with too much money and a grudge." Amanda suddenly stepped between us. Her voice, usually soft and hesitant, rose clear and sharp. "Chad, stop." He blinked at her, stunned. "What did you just—" "I said stop." Her voice trembled, but she stood her ground. "She's not your enemy. She never was. You are." For a moment, time froze. Chad's face twisted in shock. Amanda's hands shook, but she didn't back down. I looked at her, my heart aching. She had finally spoken, finally chosen. I turned to Chad, my voice low and steady. "No, Chad. I didn't make an enemy. You did, the moment you looked me in the eye and treated me like I didn't matter." He staggered back, his pride crumbling in front of the very tenants who had once been his neighbors. He had lost not just control, but the loyalty of the one person he thought he owned, Amanda. The meeting ended. Tenants came to me, shaking my hand, thanking me, asking questions about improvements. Amanda sat in silence, her hands clenched in her lap, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. When the room finally emptied, Chad stormed toward the door, muttering curses under his breath. Amanda lingered, her gaze fixed on me. "I didn't know," she whispered, "about the building, about any of this." "I know," I said. Her chin trembled. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because, Amanda," I said gently, "you needed to open your eyes. Not for me, for yourself." She blinked, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I'm sorry, Mom, for everything, for that night, for letting him—" Her voice cracked. "I don't know how to fix it." I studied her face, the face I had once rocked to sleep, the face that had turned away from me at the dinner table. Now it was breaking, searching. "You can't fix the past," I said softly, "but you can choose the future." Her lips trembled, but she nodded. She turned toward the door, then paused. "I miss you." I didn't answer, not yet. As she left, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The truth was out. The confrontation had happened. And for the first time since that cold night when I stood outside with my suitcases, the balance had shifted. This wasn't revenge. It was revelation. And it was only the beginning of Amanda's awakening. After the confrontation, everything changed. Chad's rage didn't fade. It boiled hotter. But this time, it wasn't just me he directed it at. It was Amanda. Without her silence, without her loyalty, he was powerless. And a man like Chad could not survive without control. The building staff told me whispers of what followed. Neighbors heard him shouting late at night, accusing Amanda of betrayal, of hiding secrets. He tore through their apartment like a storm, searching for evidence that I was somehow pulling her strings. The truth was simpler. Amanda was beginning to see him for what he truly was. And then, one rainy evening, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, Amanda stood there, drenched, clutching a grocery bag to her chest. Her eyes were red, her face pale. For a moment, she said nothing. She just stood there, trembling, waiting. I stepped aside. She walked in slowly, dripping water on my hardwood floor. I handed her a towel and a cup of tea. She sat on the couch, her hands wrapped tightly around the mug, as if it were the only thing keeping her steady. "He's not who I thought he was," she whispered finally. I stayed silent. I kept telling myself he was stressed, that he'd change. But he's worse. He's obsessed. He thinks someone's targeting us. He checks my phone, my emails. He follows me to work. Last week he accused me of helping you. Her voice cracked. I told him I hadn't spoken to you in weeks. That was a lie. I came here. I found your name on the management notice. I met her eyes. They were raw, wounded, searching. I miss you, Mom, she said softly. But I don't know how to be around you anymore. I let him push you out. I stood by him. Her voice broke. I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed to remember what it felt like to be safe. For a long moment, I said nothing. Silence can wound, but it can also heal. Finally, I reached across the table and touched her hand. She flinched at first, then clung to me, tears spilling over. That night, Amanda left Chad. She told me later that the breaking point came when he tried to go through her laptop, demanding proof of conspiracies that didn't exist. She said no. He screamed, packed a bag, and left, swearing he'd come back. But she changed the locks the next morning. When she told me those words, I'd rather find out who I am without him than keep disappearing by his side. I knew the daughter I had raised was finally resurfacing. It wasn't easy. There were days Amanda cried on my couch, ashamed of how blind she had been. Nights she admitted she didn't know who she was anymore. But slowly, painfully, she began to rebuild. She moved into a small studio near her job. She started therapy. She joined a local art class, painting colors she once buried. And me? I changed too. I sold the building, not because I needed the money, but because I no longer needed it as a symbol. The revenge had served its purpose. Justice had been delivered. It was time to close that chapter. Half the proceeds went to a shelter for women and children in crisis, the kind of place I wish I had known about the night I stood on the curb with 2 suitcases and nowhere to go. I asked them to name a new wing after my mother, the Eleanor House, a tribute to the woman whose silent love had given me strength even after death. The other half, I used to buy a small home in Cedar Park, the same quiet street where Amanda once rode her bike as a child. A modest 2-bedroom with oak trees in the yard and a porch swing out front. It wasn't extravagant. It was mine. The day I moved in, Amanda helped me unpack. She didn't say much at first, but after the last box was carried inside, she sat on the porch swing beside me, her legs tucked beneath her like she used to as a girl. I remember riding my bike here, she said softly, before everything got complicated. You were always safe here, I told her. She nodded. I forgot what that felt like. We didn't mention Chad. We didn't need to. His chapter had ended quietly, like a door closing in another room. Rumor had it he left town, ranting about conspiracies and ruined lives. But his threats had been silenced by lawyers, his pride destroyed by the one thing he never expected, a woman he underestimated. That evening, Amanda and I made grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, just like we used to when she was little. She burned one side of the bread, and we both laughed. It was the first real laughter we had shared in years. Later, after she left, I stood at the window holding a cup of tea. The moonlight stretched across the lawn, bathing everything in silver. For the first time since my husband's death, since Amanda's betrayal, since those endless nights in the motel, I felt at peace. I whispered the words aloud, not to Amanda, not to Chad, but to myself. I forgive you. Not because they had earned it, but because I deserved it. Forgiveness wasn't about erasing the past. It was about freeing myself from it. They tried to erase me. They tried to reduce me to nothing. But I had risen from the ashes, not as the fire they tried to extinguish, but as the spark they could never kill. I sat down on my porch swing, the night air cool against my skin, and smiled. For the first time in a long, long time, I was home